If you haven't checked it out yet, go to thechurchcrew.com and check out their website. Try it out for free. I think you'll like it. And while you're there, let them know how grateful you are that they sponsor Keeping It Young. Hello and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
We are happy to have you join us today.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us again at our podcast. And as you know, if you've been with us these last few weeks, we're in the middle of a very important series.
Yes, we are.
And we are talking about training our boys to become men and training our daughters to become ladies.
Yes.
I think we've kind of hit a nerve on this. I was... maybe a nerve is not the right word.
Have we gotten poor feedback?
No, it's just that we have gotten a lot more interest than we normally do as far as people sharing, commenting.
Right.
Our social media has been more alive, and even we've had some tweets from places and organizations that I do not know at all.
Right.
So we got, even more. I've gotten more personal messages and things than normal. And it just shows that our society is really, really messed up.
It is. And I think maybe does it show that people are not wanting to hit a nerve, but they're hoping that somebody will speak out and at least talk to those of us in Christianity about the importance of this.
I think so. And I also think that in our generation, or at least in our culture, maybe is the right word, our culture is very anti-Christianity. And we would, to use theologically, we might say it's anti-Christ. But certainly because we live in a culture where femininity is applauded, masculinity is downplayed, or even there's an attempt to destroy masculinity.
Well, I would say the cultural view or ideology of femininity, which would be feminism.
Feminism, yes.
Yes.
And so we really are just living in a culture to where parents across the board are concerned about their sons and their daughters.
Yes.
And this is an important issue because it addresses so many important areas. When our country does not have male leadership, then our country will struggle because God does put a lot of premium on male leadership, just in the way he designed the male brain and the way men think and lead.
Right.
It does even affect the church. And this is a topic that is being discussed often today, that the church is becoming even more feminine focused and less masculine focused.
True.
And in fact, according to statistics, more churches are filled with women than are men because men do not care to go to that church.
Right.
And so there's just so many areas here. And often people will, we get letters and texts and questions in our meetings and conferences and things about children. How do we help our sons in a culture like this? How do we help our daughters in a culture like this?
Right.
And so this is where we're coming from. This is where we're headed. And if you've been with us through the first two parts, we talked about just an introduction to the series.
Right.
And then last week we began the section on teaching our boys to be men. And if you were with us, just to kind of bring you up to speed, if you're just joining us for today, we talked about how that we should recognize that we have to train our sons to be men.
Right.
By nature, if a son left to himself, the Bible says, will bring his mother to shame.
Yes, and in our culture, that will be a very difficult and confusing thing for him to do, to bring himself up to become a man.
Yeah, and the culture itself will do everything it can to undermine,
yes.
is the point I was making there. So we do have to train our sons. It's super important in this culture more maybe than any other culture.
True.
At least, in recent history. And so we just reminded you to pray about it. Pray for your sons to be men and train in several areas. You train specifically. You got to keep a list of the things you're teaching.
Right.
You train in real life. As you do, you make it a training matter. You train with talking. There's a ton of talking that goes into training our sons to be men.
Yes.
And that's a huge one because our culture doesn't talk anymore. And depending on which set of statistics you run with, some say that we talk to our children less than 7 minutes a week.
Oh my!
And that is just probably because life is just crazy busy.
True.
And when we are home, well, how often do we go out to eat and watch families sit at tables and never talk?
Right. They all have their phones.
I took our son and daughter to just a quick meal recently, and sitting at the table, we were near a family, not a family, it was a dad, I guess, and two children. They were probably 8 or 9. And the dad never one time looked at his children the entire time we were in the hospital because he was on his phone.
You were in the hospital?
I'm sorry, in a restaurant. Why did I say hospital?
I'm sorry, I don't know. But it was such a good illustration, and I
was.
didn't mean to draw attention, but I don't want everybody to be like, oh, why were they in the hospital?
That's a very good question.
Okay, go ahead.
They were in a restaurant, but he never looked at his kids. They sat at the table, and the little boy was, he turned around and smiled at our Charity, and she winked at him. And he smiled really largely, and he gave her a definite dramatic wink back. and she was like, that little guy just winked back at me, and this wasn't just a little hey, it was like hey.
And how old was he?
He's probably 8.
Oh, okay.
Maybe 7.
Okay.
Just a little guy.
But definitely responding in a masculine way.
Absolutely. Noticing he knows a pretty girl when he sees one. But his dad never talked to him. And the little boy and the little girl sat there and talked to themselves. But honestly, Dad never one time we were in the restaurant ever spoke to his children. And, it just reminded me of how easy it is to be together and not talk. We have headphones on. We have a screen in front of us.
Right.
And so we have to on purpose decide, no, I'm going to speak up. I'm going to be in the moment with my children. I'm going to work at training my son.
And a lot of
and
those
my daughter.
Training discussions happen when you're just talking
in real life
about how was your day, what happened in youth group last night, hey, what did you think of the message in church today, or what happened at ball practice, so those conversations just naturally can happen.
Yes. And conversations are an opportunity to share what you believe and why, and to sharpen your children's thinking.
Right.
And just recently, my son and daughter and I had a huge talk about tattoos. And there's, opinions are all over the place. We have some friends who are like, to have a tattoo is evil, wicked, godless, and very wrong. And we have others on the other side who are like, who cares? Get a tattoo if you want to.
Right.
And so we had a huge opportunity to discuss the practical ramifications and the whys and what we think and why we think it. And it was a very good conversation. So you've got to do a ton of talking if you're going to teach your boys to be men.
Right. And we're probably going to get some requests now to do an episode on tattoos. Are they biblical or not?
I doubt it. Nobody cares about that, surely.
Okay.
So if you were with us last week, then here was our first 2 points. Number 1, you got to start early.
Yes.
You start as soon as possible teaching your little guy. And you say things to him like, wait, a gentleman wouldn't say that. This is how a man would say that.
Yes.
And you remind him a man protects his younger brothers and sisters, and you stand like this. Or you remember when our children were in church, we even would teach our children, this is how you stand.
Yes.
And, this is what you do when someone comes and speaks to you. What are we training them? We're starting as early as possible to put in the heart of our children, this is how a man behaves.
Right.
And so you start early, start early. And then this is a huge one, and you get them working.
Yes.
And this is where we really cut off last week, because we just really talked to you guys about don't underestimate how vital this is.
Yes.
Because it teaches discipline.
Yeah.
It teaches common sense. That's a huge one. Just even this week again, I got a text from a pastor looking for a staff member, and he had to let one staff member go. But the reason he let the staff member go, the kid is likable. The kid is gifted. The kid is talented. But there were several things. The kid is not teachable, and the kid, just practically speaking, doesn't know how to connect to teenagers and do the work. And it's almost impossible to take an adult child, especially if they haven't been trained to be, learning and pliable.
Yes.
And so he had to let this young man go. So the common sense side, just you've got to train your kids to work. It teaches discipline. It teaches common sense. It teaches people skills. It teaches even wage earning and life making skills.
Yes.
And every time we can give our children the ability to make a living or to make money, we are helping them to succeed in life, just in a practical sense.
Yes.
And so that's essential.
Well, and I think too, it just teaches the responsibility that life just naturally will hand them. I know even with our 20-year-old, Jacob, he's working, and he's working hard, and he leaves before 7 a.m. and often doesn't get home until after 5 in the evening. And yes, he is tired. He is working hard in the hot sun that we have here in Northwest Florida, and the humidity. And that does take a lot out of you. And sometimes he will say, I I don't want to come home and clean up my room, or I don't want to come home and do this or that, have to mow the grass, or sometimes when we're out of town, he'll say, Mom, I don't have anything in the refrigerator to eat. And I'll say, well, I did stock it, but I'm going to be gone long enough. You'll have to stop at the grocery store. Well, I'm tired at the end of the day. And these things that you teach your children, giving them responsibilities around the house, teaches them that, life is always going to need something else to do. So that teaches them the adult manly responsibility of,
Absolutely.
you know what, I worked hard all day, but my wife wants me to stop at the store on my way home. And so I can do that, and I can pick this up, or I can come home and mow the grass. And
So it's training them to work.
Yes.
That helps with all of that. Here's a quote from our friend Harold Vaughn. Brother Vaughn, in his teaching about masculinity, says, masculinity isn't toxic. The absence of masculinity is toxic. Weak men are abusive and spiteful, but strong masculine men are protective and loving.
it's good.
And that is so good to think. Our culture wants to downplay masculinity because it claims that masculinity is toxic, but it's actually weak masculinity or the absence of masculinity that's toxic.
Yes.
And moms and dads, you have to think differently. Colossians reminds us, or Ephesians chapter 4 rather, reminds us that in the culture we live in, the culture around us, they believe things that are not true. And they embrace things that are not true. And so
Right.
the Bible says as believers, we have to put off the old man and be renewed in our minds and put on the new man.
Right.
And part of that is true in this thinking about masculinity and femininity, is the world around us has so many errors that we have to continually think, okay, what is biblically true here?
Right.
And even on top of that, what is wisely true and practically true? And it just never ends. Masculine men are protective and loving.
Yes.
And that's important for you to think. So here's a couple more things. We're talking about getting them working.
I was going to ask you a question. Do you think that culturally speaking, when they are saying, we need to emasculate men, masculinity is toxic? And when they say that, are they equating abusive traits that they may have grown up with? Maybe they had a dad that was abusive, or maybe they see something in history that they think is abusive, and then they equate that with things that men just are geared to do. By and large, I'm just talking generally, but men, like to play rough sports, or men like to go out and do really difficult hiking, or really difficult, sporting things like hunting, or, all of those things. So do they say, oh, well, this guy was abusive and he was also a hunter, so masculinity must just be, everything that goes with masculinity must be wrong?
Well, there's probably some definite truth to that, but there's a spiritual side to things, because masculinity is very biblical and very Christian based.
Right.
Christianity has a very definite view of this is what a masculine man is, and biblically this is what a masculine man is. And since our culture hates Christianity, and spiritually speaking, the enemy, the devil, the adversary hates Christianity, then the lies that are being spread about masculinity are being spread as an attack against Christianity, against truth.
Okay.
So there's a spiritual side, but there's also an ideological side, in the sense that people in our culture, now that the culture is anti-male, anti-masculinity, then the culture finds all kinds of reasons to continue to point that out. And, the old saying is that if you tell a lie long enough, people will believe it.
Right.
And we're certainly seeing that really lived out in this idea of Christian masculinity.
Yes.
And as the idea is that, especially even the white male, a white man is just automatically toxic. And they can point to all kinds of reasons for that. They'll point to a white man that, he maybe own slaves and say, see, their white masculinity is ungodly. Well, there's no doubt about it. It's wrong for any man, black, white, any man to own a slave.
True.
That is ungodly, that is wrong, that is never right. But the fact of the matter is, to relegate, to attack masculinity because men led in a world where things were wrong at times,
Right.
is just an attack, against biblical truth and Christianity.
True.
So what do we do about this? Well, if we're going to help our boys to be men, then this is still continuing this idea of get them working. One of the most important things that you can do is get your son working.
Right.
So last week, the whole point of last week was don't underestimate how vital this is.
True.
Today, let's add some more to that. Just in a practical sense, learn to make your responsibilities training times for your sons.
Yes.
Now that's just so simple.
Yes.
But if you're going to be mowing and doing yard work, then you get your kids mowing and doing yard work.
Yes.
And you teach them, you show them. If you have to, work on a mower blade, then have your son there. And, don't just yell at your son because he can't find a tool. Take the time to say, this is what that tool is called. This is where you will find it. This is how you use it.
Unless they put it away in the wrong place the last time and then they can't find it where it's supposed to be.
That can happen, but even then, that can be a matter of training.
Yes.
To say, okay, let's find it. And and sometimes, dads, life is so busy that we can get so frustrated with our sons because life is busy. And we want things in our culture to be done fast. Let's get this done, grab that, grab this, do this, do that, run, go, grab that for me. We got to take care of this. But one of the things you'll find about raising children is that it takes time and it slows you down. And you have to embrace that.
Yes.
You have to be willing to allow the slow down. If I'm checking the oil, it's a whole lot easier for me to just, we would say pop the hood, raise the hood, pull out the dipstick, check the oil, put it back down, drop the hood, we're done.
Yes.
Takes a whole lot more time to say, this is how you open the hood. And to say, this is a dipstick. And this is how you pull it out. And you see these little grooves right here. And see this, all of this, that's a matter of talking and training. How do you check tires?
Yes.
And here we live in the woods, so we cut a lot of trees because we're in Hurricane Alley. And the water level here helps our oak trees to grow really fast, but they also grow rather shallow. So their roots aren't very, so we have to cut a lot of trees. Any storm that comes through can move them and they start leaning and then it's got to come down. But it's a whole lot easier just to do it yourself, but to take the time to say, this is how you, put a tree down. This is how you run the chainsaw. This is how you start the chainsaw. This is why you wear ear protection or eye protection.
Right.
This is how you chop wood.
Yes.
And this is why.
And when they're young, mamas, this can be hard on you to think of your 8 or 9 or 10-year-old out there with dad learning how to use a chainsaw or learning how to use an axe to split wood. And you can sometimes intervene and just think, oh, no, they're way too young. So first of all, God hasn't given us the spirit of fear. Maybe have a discussion with your husband. And if your husband is saying, you know what, I really think it's time for him to learn this and I'm going to be right there and I will protect him, then trust your husband and then it'll help your prayer life too.
Yes, you should pray about that. That's awesome. One of the things, moms, let me just even address you, ladies, because it is true that sometimes as dads try to train their sons, not only is the culture is aghast. Oh my, that little boy is too small to be mowing that yard. When we were kids, if you drove by a yard and there was a little fellow in there pushing a lawnmower and he could barely reach the handles and he's having to lean into it, you would celebrate that. You would be like, wow, look at that little boy on that work he's doing. Now people will, almost act like you're abusing a child. Like that kid is too young to be doing that. Why are you making him do that?
Right.
And so you have to think differently about the culture. And not everything has to be splitting wood, mowing grass, and checking oil and all that.
True.
Even boys can learn to do laundry because boys wear clothes and boys will, and your son, chances are, will be single, somewhere as an adult maybe.
Right.
And especially in our culture, if he doesn't get married at least 25, he might not live in your home. So training him to do laundry on his own is going to be important.
Absolutely.
And that's work. So you train them how to handle business deals. So where, they learn how to, talk through something or, purchase something.
Right.
And you can always be there to help them, to train them. And Dad, let them see how you're doing things.
Right.
And here's just another aside. Dad, our cult, one of the things we've said before is that in our, you'll hear this quote, more is caught than is taught. And sometimes that's true because if you have a dad who's dishonest, in his business dealings, there's a good chance his son will be as well. And so this working is you're just making your responsibilities times of training for them.
Right.
And that's super huge. Hey, before we go any further, let's just take a moment and just remind all of you to just give a shout out to our sponsors.
Okay.
And so let's just give at least a two here. And we've talked about them so many times, but if you have not yet checked out thechurchcrew.com, you should. And it is just a wonderful tool to help your church to organize its volunteers.
Right.
And it's a very affordable. We were in a church recently that is using it and gave it 2 thumbs up all the way around. Love it. They love it. They love it. They love it. Thechurchcrew.com.
Yes.
And check it out. Go visit the website, watch the video. And while you're there, consider using it. Take it for a trial and use it. I think it'd be a great tool, a great asset to your church volunteers, and to your volunteer leaders as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And so they need that.
Yes.
And then don't forget about MyPillow.com. MyPillow does support us when you purchase using our code YOUNG, Young.
Yes.
And they have just a crazy amount of things. If you've never been to their website, their dog beds are excellent.
I love that you just keep promoting the dog bed, but they are pretty amazing.
They are.
And Peyton loves it.
And they're guaranteed. They take care of you.
Yes.
Their sandals, Bethlie still loves their sandals.
The house shoes, yes.
House shoes,
slippers.
house slippers. And of course, their pillows are just excellent as well.
Excellent. And the sheets and the towels, we could probably go on and on. I really do love their products.
So we want to give a shout out to the Church Crew and to MyPillow.com. And now back to our notes here. Let's just talk about this one just for a moment. You can give your children's jobs and pay them for work well done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I realized some months ago that, if you pay someone to put a wax job on your car, to a coat of wax on it,
right,
that it costs you somewhere between $100 and $150 in this area to get someone to wax your car.
Wow.
So I taught our son, and he was wanting to make a little extra money for something. I think it was for college or college bills or something. Mm-hmm. And so I hired him to wax the car rather than pay someone else.
Right.
I hired him to wax the vehicle.
Right.
And I even hired him to wax our motorhome, which is 45 feet long and 13 feet tall. And so that took some time. It took a long time to do that. But rather than pay someone else to do it, give your children jobs and pay them for work well done.
Right.
And that means you have to teach them how to do it, teach them what you expect.
Right.
And that's helping boys to become men.
Mm-hmm. It would be just something that might be a task that you might just say, son, I want you to wash and wax the car this weekend. And that's just something they do. And that's fine. But if it's an extra task that you just haven't been able to get to and you are thinking about hiring someone to do and your child can do it, then that would be an opportunity for you to say, hey, would you like to make an extra $20, $50, $100?
And, your children may say things like this, and this is true of the culture, but it's so hot out here, and it's taking forever. Mm-hmm. And in other words, it's hard.
It is.
When you're working outside and it's hot, and there's mosquitoes eating you alive, and it's just taking forever to get this job done. And our culture wants things so fast, but when you're waxing a car, you have to wax the car. You have to allow the wax to dry, and then you have to get it off, and then you have to go back to make sure you didn't miss anything.
Right.
And a lot of times in our culture, parents just give up. They don't even try. Moms and dads, if you're going to train your boys to become men, you have to help them in the work responsibilities to do hard things.
Yes.
It is absolutely essential.
Yes.
And you can even assign them responsibilities around the home. Your sons can clean, and it's good for them to learn that.
Yes.
Don't get this idea that, this is a man's job, this is a woman's job. There might be some element of truth to that, perhaps somewhere along the way. But boys can cook, boys can clean, and it's important to learn that. All of our sons are very manly, and all of our sons are very good cooks.
Yes, they are.
And it's just because Bethlie took the time to teach.
And all of our boys can clean, too.
They absolutely can.
Which the ones who are married and their wives are in a pinch, they're just like, oh, thank you. And honestly, ladies, don't you love it when your husband helps you around the house? I don't know. Maybe there are some ladies that are listening are like, no, I really don't. I don't like it. But I will tell you, for me, if things are in a pinch and we need to get going somewhere and David's like, well, hey, let me take this over. And most of we've talked about too, that our family all cleans up dinner together. So David always is helping with dishes and cleanup and things. And I super appreciate that. And so training your boys to see jobs around the house and go ahead and do them and get them done, which they're not going to normally see them unless you start to assign them and teach them how to do. Just eventually their wives are just going to think, this is awesome.
Absolutely.
I do have some built-in help.
And their bosses will as well.
Yes.
Because they see a need, and this teaches your children to see a need and get the job done.
Yes.
And to finish the job. And part of assigning responsibilities is teaching your sons to care for their own belongings, their clothes,
Yes.
care for it themselves, their bedroom, as far as changing their sheets, cleaning things up, putting things away, dusting their rooms. Our children clean their own rooms.
Yes.
And that means they vacuum it. That means they wash their sheets, they change their sheets, they dust. They know how to pick up their own clothes. They have a place for the trash.
Yes.
And, they're just children, and we're not weird about this, but by a little bit of training, our children are well on their way to becoming adults who are strong,
right,
and mature and able to get the job done.
Right. And you know how naturally people don't take care of things that are not theirs as much as they take care of it if they had to actually pay for it.
Yes.
And most of the stuff that your children will have in their room, they didn't actually pay for that. And so if you're not teaching them to care for it, then they just get an entitlement mentality, first of all. Well, it doesn't matter if I take care of this or not. Mom and dad are just going to buy me more, whatever. So you're teaching them to care for that. That gives them some responsibility. And then as they become adults, I know that our adult children are always like, wow, it costs a lot to live. And
Yes,
so
it does.
they super appreciate that they already know how to take care of things. We're not going to be really rough on our furniture because I would have to go out and buy some more of that. Or, this refrigerator is running a little weird. I'm going to see if I can fix it and take care of it instead of, just letting it die and having to pay $1,500 for a new one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a couple of hours of work to save $1,500
Absolutely.
is vital.
Yes.
And it's super important and super helpful. So we're talking about training our boys to become men. And so you start early and you get them working.
Yes.
And that is super, super important. Now, we're running out of time today, but next week we're going to talk to you about getting them to work out, getting your guys working out.
Which is different than working.
It's exercise. And it's important. We're going to talk about why that's important in training our boys to become men.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about getting them to work out. And then we're also going to be talking about areas of importance where you have to train them. And just to give a little, glimpse into that, that's areas of finances, areas of respect, areas of purity. And we want our boys to begin leading themselves as soon as possible. Our goal as parents is that our children will parent themselves. And so those are the coming areas we want to talk to you about, and just a few more areas left. And we will then be moving to training our girls to become ladies.
To be feminine and not a feminist.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, any other thought about work? Because we're getting ready to leave that. Any other thoughts you would throw out to our audience?
I don't think so. I know in other episodes when we've talked about training children, we have done a great deal about how to train your children how to work. So if you need more practical ideas, you could go back and look through the episodes. I know that all of the episodes, you can find them on our website. I don't know how far back your
podcast host.
Your podcast host of choice would go back. I don't know, like Spotify or anything like that. But on the website, you can go back and you can look through, and there are many, many episodes on training our children. And I'm sure that we talk very practically about training them to work.
Absolutely we do. Well, we're out of time today. Thank you for joining us in this very important discussion about training our boys to become men. And hope you'll join us next week as we'll continue this thought. In the meantime, this week ahead, serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.